So today we're going to talk about basal body temperature and how we use it in Chinese medicine, what it signifies, and also what it's used for in Western medicine, and how we go about taking the basal body temperature. So the basal body temperature, it's the measure of your body's temperature when you're completely at rest. So it's usually the first thing in the morning. You don't want to take the temperature with any activity because that will raise your body temperature. We want to know exactly what your body temperature is when it's completely at rest at its lowest state. So that's usually the first thing in the morning. And the basal body temperature is a way in Western medicine how we can identify when ovulation occurs. So it helps us understand when ovulation occurs, if it's occurring, and it's used to predict in later cycles when ovulation occurs. And that's useful for two reasons: to find out when you want to have sex if you're trying to have a child, or when you want to avoid it if you don't want to be pregnant. So that's the main use that we have from a Western medical standpoint. But there's a lot more uses in a Chinese medical standpoint that we're going to talk about. So it's really important to understand, how do you measure the basal body temperature accurately? It's a very precise measurement, and small changes can affect the accuracy of what we're trying to track. So you need to use a thermometer that specifically does basal body temperature. That's the best, and it needs to measure to a tenth of a degree at least. So you, like I said earlier, you want to check the basal body temperature first thing in the morning as soon as you wake up before you do any activity. Even just laying in bed awake or talking can raise your body temperature. So you want to keep the thermometer right next to your bed and be able to just reach for it first thing as soon as you wake up and check your temperature. It's best if you can do it around the same time every day. It helps to minimize variations, because what we're wanting to do is compare how it changes from day to day. So having as much consistency as possible is important. And then you want to try to do it when you've had a good night of sleep before. So ideally, you want to have it several hours, more than 3 or 4 at minimum. But if you're out late and not getting proper sleep, that's going to affect your basal temperature. So it needs to be done when you've had a good night's sleep and at least several hours of sleep before checking it. And you're going to typically notice that before ovulation, your basal body temperature is going to be lower, and it will have a small dip, and then it'll rise about zero point 0.5 to 1 degree Fahrenheit after ovulation. And then after ovulation, it tends to stay a little bit higher. Now, when you do check your basal body temperature, when you get the actual degree, you want to write it down, and typically on a graph paper that we'll share a link to that you can use. And what we look at is, after the whole month is over, what was the trajectory of your temperature day by day? Can we identify when that sharp increase happens that signifies ovulation? And is that happening at a normal time? And is it actually happening regularly? So let's talk a little bit about the significance of basal body temperature from a Western medical perspective. So we're going to talk about it from the Western medical perspective and then the Chinese medical perspective. So the basal body temperature from a Western medical perspective is primarily and solely used for identifying when ovulation occurs. So it's related to hormonal changes. And so on day one of the menses, the follicles are beginning to grow in the ovaries. And this is the time period when the basal body temperature is relatively lower. And that first phase is known as the follicular phase. And during the follicular phase, there's relatively more estradiol than progesterone. And there's also the secretion of a hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, which you may have heard of. It's a hormone that comes from the pituitary, and it goes to the ovaries and it stimulates the ovaries to produce and grow follicles. And during the follicular phase, the follicles are growing, and as the phase progresses, there tends to grow a dominant follicle or a larger one that will be the one that releases an egg. And when the follicle is mature and it releases the egg, that is when ovulation occurs. Ovulation is also triggered by FSH and LH, and there's a spike in both the FSH and LH that occurs during ovulation. And after ovulation, that's about the halfway point of the whole cycle, is what the second part is known as the luteal phase. And during the luteal phase is when progesterone increases. And progesterone is what helps to develop the uterine lining, and it helps to prepare the uterus for implantation of the fertilized egg. And it's thought from a Western medical perspective that that increase in progesterone is what causes the increase in the basal body temperature. So from a Western medical perspective, the basal body temperature is related to several of these different hormonal changes, and it's primarily used to help determine what day in the cycle is ovulation occurring. So let's talk about basal body temperature from a Chinese medical perspective. So from a Chinese medical perspective, the menstrual cycle is broken up into 4 phases. And the first phase is the period. This is the time when a woman has the menstrual bleeding. And from a yin and yang perspective, the menstrual bleeding is a time when the yang energy has already peaked and it is now transforming to yin. So in yin yang theory, there is yin, which once it gets to its point of fullness and maximal level, it then transforms to yang, and then yang energy begins to increase. And when it reaches its fullest potential, it then transforms to yin. So there's a constant growth and transformation of yin and yang energy. And we see that in the menstrual cycle. And so the period is when the yang energy has already reached its peak and it is beginning to transform to yin. And so we see the shedding of the menstrual blood. And then the second phase begins, which is the follicular phase in Western medicine. And the follicular phase is more of the yin phase of the cycle. It's a time when the yin blood is beginning to grow and to flourish. The yang energy is declining and it reaches a nadir, a low point. And that's also why you see development of cervical mucus during that time. And it signifies that ovulation is about to occur, that there is a healthy amount of yin substance and blood in the body. And so because it is the yin phase, the basal body temperature is relatively cooler at that time because yin has a lower temperature than yang. Yang tends to be associated with heat, with warm, with activity. Yin is associated with coolness, with rest, with relative inactivity. And so the basal body temperature dips down during that first follicular phase, and that's the relatively yin phase of the cycle, and it represents the abundance of yin. So then comes phase 3, which is ovulation. And during ovulation, what has happened is the yin energy has continued to rise and it reaches its full and maximal potential. And it then transforms to yang energy. And that's what releases the egg from the follicle. And what you see in the basal body temperature is a sharp increase in temperature at the time, as the yin energy is now emptied out and transformed into yang energy, causing that yang temperature to rise in the body. And that's the third phase, ovulation. And then finally, the fourth phase is the luteal phase, what we call the luteal phase in Western medicine. And during the fourth phase, the yang energy is growing, it's preparing the uterus for implantation, and that's represented by the relatively higher basal body temperature because there's more activity, there's more warmth happening in the body and in the uterus. And the yang continues to rise until it reaches its peak. And at that point, it then transforms to yin, and that brings on the flow of menstrual blood. and the whole cycle restarts. So that's how we view the four phases of the menstrual period during using a Chinese medical perspective. So, in conclusion, the basal body temperature is useful in both Western and Eastern medicine. In Western medicine, it's primarily used for determining ovulatory timing, but in Chinese medicine, it gives us a lot more information about the health of yin and yang of the body, and it can help to differentiate follicular phase problems from luteal phase problems, ovulatory and period problems. And it can help us understand and treat a wide variety of conditions such as premenstrual syndrome, PCOS, period pain, missed periods, irregular periods, infertility, ovarian cysts, many other disorders. We get a lot of information about the body's health and about things that may be going wrong, causing a variety of these issues from the basal body temperature. So it's very important to understand how to use the basal body temperature, how to take it, and the kind of information that it can provide for your doctor. So I hope this video helps you to learn how to measure your basal body temperature and understand its significance, especially in Chinese medicine. And if you'd like more information on the services that we provide and how Chinese medicine may be able to help you, you can visit us at HoustonAcupuncture.com. And thanks for watching.